This video is about free trade versus protectionism. So, free trade is basically any international trade where there exists no trade barriers or restrictions such as tariffs, quotas, or embargoes. The concept of free trade is to bring more efficiency to the world market. Free trade is good for a lot of reasons, and most economists agree that more free trade is good as a general statement. And the reasons that free trade is good is that it increases consumer utility, choice, and surplus. With more countries engaging in more free trade, it kind of opens up the world in terms of what we have to choose from and more competition. From producers means lower prices for us and greater efficiency. So all in all, consumers win with free trade. And the last advantage of free trade is the greater ability to acquire goods and resources, as, again, goods are more free to flow around the world. Now, free trade can be looked at as bad for a few reasons in specific instances. So one of the major arguments is against dumping. And dumping is very simply when a country, or really a company, ends up selling their product overseas for less than what it cost them. So they might have a surplus of 1,000 units of something or 100,000 units and say, you know what, I really want to hurt country X. So let's go in there and sell these really nice phones that cost us $200 to make, but let's sell them for $50 because that will ruin the domestic producers. And so dumping is an argument that, you know, we need to limit trade because of this instance. Another bad thing about free trade is survival of the fittest country, and the idea that some countries are not going to be very productive. And if they allow for free trade, then they're going to be hard-pressed to find anything to produce domestically, and where their jobs and income going to come from. Another argument against free trade is the national security argument. You know, if I have a company that can produce nuclear weapons and I'm just going to sell them freely to any country I see fit based on the assumption of maximizing profit and to the highest bidder, that may not be a good thing. So limiting free trade in national security, so not just nuclear weapons, but some of the military technology that we have, it's probably not a good idea to trade it all away. So there's some limit on that. And then the domestic jobs lost. There's this prevailing opinion of a lot of politicians that free trade means that America is going to lose jobs. And through class discussions, we'll talk about that, to what extent are jobs lost by free trade or versus protectionism. So on the flip side, why is protectionism good? So the idea of protectionism is that the country is going to protect domestic jobs, that they're going to limit free trade, so that way domestic producers and therefore the domestic workers are going to be better off. So we start with the infant industry argument, that imagine that a country is trying to develop a phone manufacturer. But when it goes to the world stage, there are so many phones available that they're just not going to be able to compete as a startup. So what the country might do is put protective tariffs on cell phones so that way the new producer could ramp up production, with the idea being that maybe like 5, 10, 15 years down the road, that industry is no longer in its infancy and no longer needs protection. The argument, like we said, about dumping and national security, that would be good reasons to protect domestic trade. It also protects domestic jobs, keeping jobs here in America. So if, Ford builds a factory in Mexico City and closes one in Detroit, then that's losing American jobs. But if the United States finds some way to protect that factory in Detroit and not make those jobs leave, then that's good for America. And lastly, diversification of the domestic economy. So like some of the Caribbean islands, they are big tourist attractions because they have a lot of beaches and really nice weather, and it's just nice places to be, beautiful places. But if they want to diversify and start producing corn or sugar or something like that, whatever's going to grow there, that they may want to diversify beyond just tourism because that is kind of susceptible, especially to recessions. So they're going to need some form of protectionism in order to diversify the domestic economy so that it's not based on just one or a few industries. So what does all that mean? Free trade versus protectionism plays out at the national political stage in America. Lots of politicians are weighing in on, especially on the side of protecting American jobs. And it's very simple for a lot of people to understand is, well, if the factory moves from Detroit to Mexico City, then we are going to be worse off. There are going to be families that are worse off, which is true. But in the whole, economists usually argue for, well, what's going to do the most amount of good for the most amount of people? That idea of that general will. And going along the lines of Adam Smith and free trade and, little government intervention, laissez-faire, is that less government intervention in the trade sector is going to make more people better off. Now, while some Americans are going to lose jobs to this, if we look at the NAFTA deal from the 1990s, where the fear was that, oh my gosh, Americans, we're going to dive into a deep, deep recession because all of these jobs are going to go overseas, and the dreaded word of outsourcing in the 2000s, ultimately jobs left America, but our unemployment rate has stayed generally the same, and towards the end of the 90s, after the NAFTA deal took effect, there was really no change in the unemployment rate because of this. Now, yes, jobs left, but much like creative destruction, we found something else for them to do. So, for the most part, economists argue that free trade over protectionist as a general statement, but in some instances, maybe like a dumping or national security, there could be some reason to limit trade.